For 20 years. My parents called me the slow one. Interesting thing about labels. If children hear them long enough, they eventually stop sounding cruel and start sounding true. My older sister Miranda collected Harvard degrees. Inheritance promises. Standing ovations at family dinners. I collected silence. Polite smiles. And the seat furthest from the center of every room. Interesting honestly. Because some families don't exile you physically. They exile you emotionally while keeping you close enough to witness everyone else being loved correctly. My name is Dulce Whitford. 28 years old. Diagnosed with dyslexia at 7. Which, according to my parents, meant I would always be less intelligent, less capable, less worthy of investment. Interesting thing about wealthy families. They often hide emotional neglect behind expensive wallpaper and good manners. The Whitfords were old Manhattan money. Hospital wings. Museum plaques. Fundraisers where people whispered our last name like it carried royalty. My father Gerald Whitford ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate empire worth $92 million by 2024. But he didn't build it. My grandmother Eleanor did. Interesting honestly. Because the people taking credit for family legacies are rarely the ones who survived building them originally. I was 7 when the school psychologist explained dyslexia to my parents. Letters moved. Words rearranged themselves. Reading took me 3 times longer than everyone else. The specialist called me highly intelligent. My mother heard defective instead. Interesting thing about certain parents. They treat differences like public embarrassment instead of information. When I was 12, Miranda received violin lessons at Juilliard Prep. French immersion tutoring. SAT coaching from a Princeton graduate charging $400 an hour. I asked for reading support once. Just once. My mother sighed heavily over her coffee. Dulce. Pause. Some children just aren't academic. I was 12 years old. And honestly, I believed her. Interesting thing about childhood shame. It enters your bloodstream long before you realize it doesn't belong there. So I adapted quietly instead. Audiobooks. Flowcharts. Visual diagrams. Systems. While everyone else read words, I learned to read patterns. Interesting honestly. Because survival skills developed in neglected children often become extraordinary strengths later. Every Sunday afternoon, I took the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side. Small place. Books stacked everywhere. Old jazz playing softly near the kitchen. And for hours, she taught me differently. Not through textbooks. Through stories. Connections. Structures. Dooley, she told me once while tracing contract diagrams across a yellow notepad. You read slower than most people. Pause. But you see things other people miss. Interesting thing about being truly seen. It feels almost physically shocking after years of invisibility. That's not weakness, Grandma Eleanor whispered. That's a different kind of vision. I didn't understand what she meant yet. First, I had to survive another 20 years inside the Whitford family hierarchy. Interesting honestly. Because some families turn achievement into oxygen. And children who struggle learn to breathe less just to avoid taking up space. Christmas 2018. 20 relatives crowded around the mahogany dining table inside my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers. Catered lamb. The annual performance of Whitford perfection. My father stood at the head of the table holding a wine glass like a politician about to deliver a campaign speech. I'd like to make an announcement. The room quieted instantly. Miranda smiled before he even spoke. Interesting thing about golden children. They usually recognize praise by the sound of the setup alone. Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law. Applause exploded immediately. Uncle Richard slapped the table. Aunt Catherine started crying. My mother looked radiant with reflected achievement. Then Dad raised his glass higher. My eldest daughter will become the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. More applause. More celebration. And then his eyes drifted toward me. Interesting, honestly. Because emotional humiliation often arrives disguised as afterthought. And Dulce. Pause. Well. Tiny smile. Dulce is also here. Soft laughter circled the table. Not cruel enough to challenge. Not kind enough to stop. Miranda laughed too. That part hurt worst. Interesting thing about sibling betrayal. Sometimes it's not what they do. It's what they allow. I stared at my plate while the roasted lamb blurred through tears I refused to let fall publicly. Then, under the table, someone squeezed my hand gently. Grandma Eleanor. Interesting, honestly. Because sometimes one person believing in you is the only reason your self-worth survives childhood intact. When I looked up, her eyes weren't sad. They were furious. Not at me. At her son. At the room. At the entire performance unfolding around her. She didn't say anything that night. Not publicly. But 3 months later, she called me to her apartment and handed me a mahogany box with brass hinges. Keep this safe, she whispered. Don't open it yet. I frowned slightly. What's inside? You'll know when it's time. Interesting thing about wise women. They prepare quiet revolutions years before anyone realizes one is coming. I tucked the box into my closet and forgot about it. Or tried to. Eleanor died 18 months later. Pancreatic cancer. Hospice room. Thin hands. Soft breathing. I held her hand while the monitors slowed. The only family member there beside her bed. Interesting, honestly. Because the people who love you most are often abandoned first by the ones claiming family matters most. After college. State University. Never Ivy League. Never Harvard. I applied for a position at Whitford Properties anyway. Not because I expected favoritism. Because I wanted a chance. Just one. My father hired me as an administrative assistant. $42,000 a year. Same month. Miranda joined as chief legal counsel. Salary. $280,000 plus bonuses. Interesting thing about unequal treatment. Families rarely notice it while benefiting from it directly. My days became photocopying contracts. Booking conference rooms. Fetching coffee for executives who forgot my name repeatedly. But while everyone ignored me, I watched. And listened. Interesting, honestly. Because invisible people notice everything. I discovered something during those long hours near the copy machines. I could identify structural problems in contracts almost instantly. Not by reading faster. By seeing patterns visually. Relationships. Money flow. Conflicts hidden between clauses. The same coping systems I built for dyslexia had evolved into something else entirely. Interesting thing about underestimated people. Their strengths often develop underground while everyone else focuses on the wrong weaknesses. Grandma Eleanor understood immediately. Your father reads contracts like a lawyer, she told me during one of our last Sundays together. Pause. He looks for what he can exploit. Another pause. You read them like architecture. I laughed softly. What does that even mean? She smiled. You see how everything connects. Interesting, honestly. Because that sentence changed my life later in ways neither of us fully understood yet. Then came April 2024. Tuesday afternoon. Subject line. Position restructuring, confidential. I opened the email 3 times before the words stopped rearranging themselves. Your position will be eliminated effective July 1st. They were firing me. Interesting thing about betrayal. Sometimes it arrives through corporate language carefully designed to sound polite. That evening, I stayed late pretending to organize files. Through the thin wall separating my cubicle from my father's office, I heard voices. Gerald. Priscilla. My parents. We can't have her here when Miranda takes over. My father's voice sounded irritated. It looks bad. What kind of bad? My mother asked softly. That people will ask why the CEO's sister is still working as a secretary. Silence. Then they'll start asking why she's the way she is. Interesting, honestly. Because some sentences expose decades of hidden cruelty instantly. My mother answered gently. We did everything we could. Pause. Some children just don't have what it takes. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. $42,000 a year. No savings. 2 roommates in Queens. And suddenly, I realized something devastating. Interesting thing about toxic families. Eventually you understand they never planned for you to succeed at all. Miranda's graduation party was the next night. 350 guests. The Plaza Hotel. A celebration for the daughter my parents proudly built their future around. And honestly, I almost didn't go. If I had skipped that party, I never would have learned my grandmother had spent 5 years preparing to destroy every lie my parents ever told about me. I had skipped Miranda's graduation party. I never would have discovered my grandmother had spent 5 years preparing for war. Interesting thing about life-changing moments. They almost always begin looking like obligations you nearly cancelled. The Plaza Hotel ballroom glittered like old money trying desperately to impress itself. Crystal chandeliers. String orchestra. Champagne towers reflecting gold light across silk tablecloths. 350 guests celebrating Miranda Whitford like royalty ascending a throne. And somewhere in the back corner sat me. Interesting, honestly. Because toxic families always make room for you physically while removing you socially. My mother intercepted me near the entrance before I even reached my table. Dulce. One word. Already disappointed. Her eyes traveled from my drugstore makeup to my scuffed heels. Interesting thing about women obsessed with appearances. They evaluate daughters the same way they evaluate furniture. You couldn't find anything nicer? This is what I could afford. Tiny pause. Well. She adjusted her Cartier bracelet carefully. You'll be sitting at table 27 near the service entrance. Of course I would. Interesting, honestly. Because families built on hierarchy make their seating charts emotionally too. And Dulce? She leaned closer. Her Chanel perfume almost suffocating. Tonight is Miranda's night. Pause. Whatever resentment you think you're entitled to. Another pause. Keep it to yourself. Then she walked away before I answered. Interesting thing about controlling parents. They deliver emotional threats politely enough to sound like etiquette. Table 27 sat partially hidden behind a marble pillar near the kitchen doors. My tablemates were distant cousins who barely remembered my name. From there, I could see the stage. The giant portrait of Miranda in Harvard regalia. The gold banner reading. Congratulations Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024. Interesting, honestly. Because some families turn one child into some families turn one child into a trophy. And the other into proof of what disappointment supposedly looks like. Interesting thing about public humiliation. It hurts differently once you realize everyone else can see the hierarchy too. I sat alone near the kitchen doors while waiters carried champagne past me toward people discussing Miranda like she'd already become Supreme Court material. Brilliant girl. Exactly like Gerald. The future of the company. Interesting honestly. Because successful families often confuse favoritism with destiny. Then Miranda took the stage. White gown. Perfect posture. Harvard ring glinting beneath chandelier light. My mother looked emotional enough to cry. My father looked triumphant. Like Miranda's success validated every cruel thing they'd ever decided about me. Interesting thing about golden children. They often mistake preferential treatment for personal superiority because nobody teaches them the difference early enough. Miranda raised her champagne glass gracefully. I just want to thank my incredible parents. Applause immediately. They sacrificed everything to support my education. More applause. My father taught me discipline. My mother taught me excellence. Interesting honestly. Because selective family memory becomes performance art once microphones enter the room. Then Miranda smiled toward the crowd. And honestly. Pause. Watching some people struggle their entire lives taught me the importance of maximizing your gifts. The room laughed softly. Not everyone. Enough people. And her eyes drifted directly toward me when she said it. Interesting thing about sibling cruelty. Sometimes it arrives polished enough to earn applause. I felt heat crawl up my throat instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. Because somewhere deep down, I had always known Miranda enjoyed the comparison more than she admitted publicly. Interesting honestly. Because benefiting from injustice eventually becomes addictive for people never forced to question it morally. My father stood next. Wine glass raised confidently. To Miranda. The crowd echoed to Miranda. 350 glasses lifted at once. Crystal chiming softly beneath ballroom lights. And honestly? I should have left right then. Interesting thing about survival. Sometimes staying 1 minute longer changes your entire life permanently. My father smiled proudly at the crowd. The future of Whitford Properties. Applause erupted again. Miranda glowed beneath it. Comfortable. Certain. Like inheritance itself had already chosen her years ago. Interesting honestly. Because privileged people often mistake long-term favoritism for destiny. Then my father's eyes drifted toward table 27. Toward me. And his smile changed slightly. Not softer. Sharper. There's also value. Pause. In understanding what happens when people simply can't compete at the same level. Silence. Tiny silence. Dangerous silence. Interesting thing about cruel people. They test humiliation slowly first to see whether the room will allow more. My mother lowered her gaze politely. Miranda smirked behind her champagne glass. And suddenly, I realized something devastating. Nobody planned to stop him. Interesting honestly. Because toxic families become most dangerous once cruelty turns traditional. Not every child can carry a legacy. My father sighed dramatically. Some are builders. Pause. Others. His eyes locked onto mine fully now. Simply require support forever. The room laughed softly again. Not loudly. Worse. The quiet wealthy people laugh. The one designed to avoid accountability later. Interesting thing about humiliation. It becomes unforgettable once witnesses participate through silence. I felt my hands trembling beneath the tablecloth. Not from shame anymore. From clarity. Huge difference. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped wondering whether my parents loved me incorrectly, and started realizing they might not have loved me at all. Interesting, honestly. Because acceptance hurts far less than confusion eventually. Then, from somewhere behind the ballroom, a voice cut cleanly through the laughter. "That's enough, Gerald." Everything stopped. Completely. Interesting thing about powerful women. They rarely need to raise their voices to change an entire room. My grandmother Eleanor stood near the ballroom entrance. Black cane. Silver silk scarf. Thin from chemotherapy. Still somehow the strongest person in the building. Nobody knew she planned to attend. Not even me. My father's face drained instantly. "Mother." "No." One word. Sharp enough to silence 300 people immediately. Interesting, honestly. Because real authority doesn't perform itself loudly. It gets obeyed automatically. Eleanor walked slowly toward the stage. Cane tapping softly against marble. Every executive. Every investor. Every relative watching her cross the ballroom like judgment arriving physically. Then she stopped directly beside Miranda and looked at the Harvard banner overhead for several long seconds. Interesting thing about disappointment. Truly intelligent people rarely react emotionally first. They observe. "This is what you celebrate?" Eleanor asked quietly. My father forced a nervous smile. "Miranda earned this." "No." Pause. "She was funded." Silence hit the ballroom like pressure dropping before a storm. Interesting, honestly. Because truth sounds almost violent once spoken publicly after years of private lies. Eleanor turned slowly toward the guests. "Do you know what my granddaughter Dulce taught herself at 13? Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She learned to visualize contractual relationships spatially because nobody would pay for reading intervention." My mother whispered sharply. "Eleanor." But Grandma kept speaking. "While Gerald paid $400 an hour for Miranda's tutoring." Pause. Dulce borrowed library audiobooks and built legal flowcharts by hand. The ballroom remained completely frozen. Interesting thing about exposure. People become very quiet once they realize the wrong person received the spotlight for years. My father laughed awkwardly. "Mother, this really isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time." Then, slowly, Eleanor looked directly toward me. And smiled. The real smile. Not pity. Recognition. Huge difference. Interesting, honestly. Because being truly seen publicly after years of invisibility feels almost unbearable emotionally. "Dulce." My throat tightened instantly. "Yes, Grandma?" "Bring me the mahogany box." The room shifted immediately. Not confusion. Fear. Interesting thing about guilty people. They recognize evidence before anyone explains what it is. My father stepped down from the stage too quickly. "Mother, enough." But Eleanor ignored him completely. "I told you years ago not to open it until the right moment." Pause. This is the moment. Interesting, honestly. Because wise women prepare timing as carefully as evidence. I drove back to Queens at midnight still wearing my cocktail dress. Hands shaking the entire way. The mahogany box sat in my passenger seat like something alive. I opened it on my apartment floor 38 minutes later. Inside. 3 leather-bound ledgers. A flash drive. And one sealed handwritten letter addressed to me. Interesting thing about family secrets. They rarely arrive small enough to fit back inside your old life afterward. The first ledger documented 22 years of internal Whitford Properties finances. Partnership diversions. Undisclosed holding companies. Offshore transfers. My father had been siphoning money quietly for years. Millions. Interesting, honestly. Because the people screaming loudest about family legacy are often stealing from it privately already. The second ledger contained something worse. Performance evaluations. Mine. Every internship. Every contract review. Every structural recommendation I'd quietly submitted during 12 years at Whitford Properties. And beside each one, Eleanor's handwritten notes. Correct. Exceptional pattern recognition. Caught liability legal missed. Only person in company seeing full structure. I stopped breathing halfway through the pages. Interesting thing about neglected children. Sometimes one sentence of validation heals wounds decades deep instantly. Then I opened the final envelope. Eleanor's handwriting shook slightly across the paper. Duly. If you are reading this, then Gerald finally confused arrogance for intelligence publicly enough that I knew he was ready. I laughed once through tears. Actually laughed. Because only my grandmother could sound amused while preparing corporate annihilation. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I built contingencies into the company long before your father believed he controlled it. Silence. Huge silence. Interesting, honestly. Because powerful women rarely surrender their legacies without hidden architecture underneath. Attached behind the letter was a voting proxy agreement. 48% controlling interest in Whitford Properties. Transferred into a protected trust 18 months earlier. Beneficiary. Dulce Eleanor Whitford. My hands started shaking so hard the paper rattled. Interesting thing about underestimated people. The moment power finally reaches them, everyone who ignored them becomes terrified simultaneously. Eleanor's final paragraph read. Miranda learned how to win rooms. Pause. You learned how to see structures. Another pause. One skill creates applause. The final line sat alone at the bottom of the page. The ink slightly smeared. The other builds empires.